It is no secret on this channel that we love our wide receivers. So today we are ranking our top 30 wide receivers overall in tier list format, starting with the first tier, 101 worthy guys, CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill. I had the fortune of drafting CeeDee Lamb and holding him on my roster for about 20 minutes yesterday in my home league draft. Then I traded him away and got Breece Hall plus a piece. I tweeted it out if you guys are not following over there. But with these guys and with all of these guys, we're going to go through bull cases and bear cases. With CeeDee Lamb, the bull case is pretty simple. He's an elite wide receiver, first team all-pro talent last year. He has a great quarterback. He's in an offense that projects to be a top 5 to 10 scoring unit. He has a MVP caliber quarterback, as we saw last year with Dak Prescott. His upside is a legendary season. His upside is what he did last year. 1,700 plus yards, 10 plus touchdowns. He could have that type of year again. With Tyreek Hill, it's a very similar situation. The only difference with Tyreek versus Lamb is that Tyreek is a little bit older. He suffered a little bit more nagging injuries, and that's kind of the tiebreaker for Lamb over Tyreek for us. But on the flip side, Tyreek Hill, at least in my opinion, is in a better offense in terms of on a target-by-target basis. Tyreek's targets are extremely valuable, and if you have any kind of big play bonuses in your league, if it's half PPR instead of full PPR, maybe you would lean with Tyreek in that type of situation. For example, in my home league, we have big play bonuses, and I would actually prefer Tyreek Hill in that type of format. But in a bog standard, full PPR type of league, I would take CeeDee Lamb over Hill.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, in terms of the efficiency of Tyreek Hill, again, it is a pick your flavor type of area. Obviously, with CeeDee Lamb, a little bit more safer of a bet, in my opinion. 25-year-old in his prime wide receiver, no real target hierarchy after him on Dallas. Like, I like Jake Ferguson, I like Brandon Cooks, Jalen Holbert, obviously been getting some hype out of camp, but the Cowboys offense starts and ends and runs through CeeDee Lamb. He's in his prime. We saw what he was able to do at the second half of last season, 28 PPR points per game after their bye week. It just feels like a safer pick. Whereas with Tyreek Hill, again, the upside is completely there. Like when he was fully healthy last year, even with Jalen Waddle on the field playing over 50% of the snaps, fun fact, 4.57 yards per route run in that stretch. So people might argue, okay, with Waddle playing more, maybe we see less overall volume for Hill. I actually think Waddle playing opens up the offense even more for Hill because, quite frankly, we know Tyreek Hill is the most efficient receiver in the league, and he's already going to earn targets to begin with. So having Waddle there impacts the overall efficiency of the offense, which I actually think helps Hill.
Yeah, and he was the highest graded receiver in the league last year. He led the position in yards per route run, targets per route run. He was just an absolute stud. So for me, I think that Hill is the better pick in terms of like an overall ceiling. But at the same time, I think CeeDee Lamb has a little bit better of a floor because of the age, because of the fact that he is clearly the number one receiver of his team. There's not really anybody challenging for those targets. But at the same time, you can't go wrong with either of these guys. You have the first pick in a PPR league, the second pick in a PPR league. We personally, if you feel confident that you can get some running backs coming back to you, would be okay taking CeeDee Lamb, taking Tyreek Hill either at 101, 102 over Christian McCaffrey. But if you're in a half PPR league, standard league, or you feel like you're not going to get any running backs coming back to you, then you could go with McCaffrey in that scenario. It all kind of just depends what you're looking at. Is Achane Pacheco going to be there for you at the 2-3 turn? Go with Lamb or Hill. Is the best running back on the board going to be Derrick Henry by the time you get back there? Then probably go with McCaffrey.
Yeah, I mean, that's why they're all 101 worthy. They're legitimate 25 plus PPR point per game type of ceilings. Really, you just got to thank your lucky stars. If you get in the top 3 of your draft and you can secure one of these 3 profiles with these 2 receivers and Christian McCaffrey, you got to thank your lucky stars, like I said. And I've seen some messages, you guys DMing me, hey, like I'm at the 5th, 6th overall pick and my league's letting CeeDee Lamb fall to me. The answer, quite frankly, draft him. Draft him. Don't let him slip past your spot because I'll be honest, if he's past even 4, 5, 6 in your league, that's the biggest deal of the draft.
Yeah, the reason for that is people are worried about the contract concerns. I mean, you're a Cowboys fan. I've been long of the opinion that the Cowboys like to drag out contract negotiations to stay in the news. I don't have any concerns that CeeDee Lamb will be back on the field for week 1. And if you're worried, oh, he missed the entire offseason program, is he going to be slow to get up to speed? Maybe a game or 2, but at the same time, he's working with the same quarterback he's worked with his entire career. It's the same offense the last 3 years that he's been playing, and there's not really anything he needs to get up to speed on.
Yeah, well, no, 100%. I mean, people are going to be worried about it because obviously it's not settled yet, but there's just so much continuity on this offensive structure that there really isn't anything, in my opinion, to be worried about.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get into the mid to late first tier. And with these guys, we have them ranked anywhere between like 104 to 110, give or take, is where we have AJ Brown at the end of this tier. So with amon-ra St. Brown, Jamarr Chase, Justin Jefferson, Garrett Wilson, and AJ Brown, St. Brown and Jefferson especially are going to be real target commanding alphas. Same with Garrett Wilson as well. Jamarr Chase and AJ Brown, more your big play guys. Obviously, there's a big time number 2 in either of those offenses, but each one of these guys has their pros and cons. I mean, for me, Amon-Ra St. Brown is the best projection here because not only does he have like pretty much no cons, like aside from Laporta, Gibbs,
Checks
and
every
James Williams,
box.
maybe eating into his workload a little bit more. And the fact that he's maybe the worst talent, or at least a lesser talent than Jefferson and Chase are in this tier, Amon-Ra St. Brown has very little concerns. He's in one of the best offenses in the league. He's the clear alpha. He's a PPR stud. He scored 10 plus touchdowns last year. He is my favorite of this group.
Yeah, exactly. When you're checking off the list of exactly what you want in a fantasy football wide receiver, offensive potency, he's got that with Detroit. Obviously, Ben Johnson calling the shots there. Quarterback play. Again, people will talk about, Jared Goff maybe as a boring quarterback, but he, like Kirk Cousins, is very good for your fantasy football wide receiver. A target commanding slot similar to that of what we saw in previous years with Cooper Kupp, for example. Again, like you said, is he going to go out there, beat man coverage like a Justin Jefferson, like a Jamar Chase will? Not necessarily, but we don't need him to when he's being schemed open such good looks.
Yeah, absolutely. With Chase, I mean, he's been a little bit unlucky in recent years with him being banged up the last couple of years, with Burrow being banged up last year. That's really the only con on his plate. I mean, T. Higgins is going to eat into his target share for sure, but I feel pretty confident that Jamar Chase is going to be 160, 170 target projection if healthy. We just need Burrow, him, and Higgins all to stay healthy on the field because the Bengals do have this kind of mythological, massive 5,000 passing yard, 40 plus touchdown season within their range of outcomes. And if that happens, Jamar Chase is going to absolutely crush his ADP. He was going at 102 last year with a very similar set of circumstances.
It's pretty hilarious because we're talking about literally last year's 101 and 102 with him and Justin Jefferson being available in the mid to late portion of your draft. So that just goes to show you, man, like these wide receiver projections, like I understand, like if you are in a league that's going to push running backs up, again, there's 3 crystal clear profiles we talked about actually in the video you guys would have watched earlier today with Christian McCaffrey, with Breece Hall, with Bijan Robinson. But really, as long as you're picking in the top 10 this year and you can secure one of these elite profiles, I'm all for it. Again, you mentioned with Jamar Chase, no real changing circumstances other than maybe more pessimism about his injury concerns, which I think is fugaz. I mean, they're knick-knack injuries that you can't predict on a year-to-year basis. And like you said, the offensive insulation has not changed.
Yeah, when players like Jamar Chase get the injuries that they had last year, you kind of just chalk it up to the variance of fantasy football and the fact that you can't predict injuries like that. It's not like Jamar Chase blew his ACL out and that's why he's falling down. Like there's no real predictivity to the injuries that he suffered. Garrett Wilson and Jefferson, obviously there's been some back and forth, particularly on my end, because I actually prefer Garrett Wilson to Justin Jefferson. The reason for that is I realize that Justin Jefferson is a better real life receiver than Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson, in my opinion, is still a top 10 to 15 talent at the position. He has Aaron Rodgers throwing him the football. I believe the pass volume will be among the top 12, top 15 in the NFL. I think that Nathaniel Hackett is going to let them throw in the red zone, as we've seen with Aaron Rodgers. Garrett Wilson has the upside to have 12 plus touchdowns, just like we saw from Devontae Adams when Aaron Rodgers last had a clear alpha number 1 wide receiver. And like I said, even though Garrett Wilson hasn't been an elite fantasy receiver yet, there's a reason we're all drafting him this high. We know he's capable of this. 90 plus percentile separator across the board, high yards per route run. He's been performing with the worst quarterback play in the NFL. And Justin Jefferson, even though he's the best receiver in the league, pound for pound, in my opinion, Sam Darnold might affect not only the offensive efficiency in Minnesota and also potentially the amount of times they throw the football. I think everybody's penciling them in to throw the ball 650, 625, 600 pass attempts overall. But when you have Sam Darnold versus Kirk Cousins, I do believe that Kevin O'Connell could try and rely on the run game a little bit more. Plus, between Garrett Wilson and Justin Jefferson, Garrett Wilson has nobody outside of Breece Hall in the backfield as a capable target to compete for touches with. And then Justin Jefferson has Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson once he comes back, and even Aaron Jones out of the backfield to compete for targets with. So again, I love both of these guys. They're my 108 and 109 respectively. I just prefer Garrett Wilson because I think the projection is a little bit better.
Yeah, and I'll get into a defense for Justin Jefferson in a second, but just highlighting your point on people might, be in this video and click off because like, what are these guys talking about potentially, Garrett Wilson over Justin Jefferson? I think you made a good case, but I will add to it as well. In games that we actually saw the Jets pass for over 200 yards, which funny enough, like this is such a low baseline, like 200 plus passing yards should be the expectation on a game-to-game basis for your passing offense. And we only saw that happen on 7 occasions in the 2023 season. When they actually passed for over 200 plus passing yards, Garrett Wilson in those games, over a 32% target share with 13.3 targets per game, 15.7 PPR points, which would have ranked as the wide receiver 14. Again, they were passing for over 200 plus yards, but it was still Zach Wilson. It was still Tim Boyle. It was still gross quarterback play. And another addition to the point is in that stretch, 35% receiving yards market share. Now, with Aaron Rodgers coming in, a guy that between 2018 and 2022, when healthy, was a top 5 quarterback in EPA per play. This offense, assuming Aaron Rodgers is fully healthy across the season, has the opportunity to be similar to what we saw in 2022 and 2023 from CeeDee Lamb in terms of target hierarchy, elite talent, being able to command targets, and great quarterback play. Because obviously we saw Dak Prescott for CeeDee Lamb. If Aaron Rodgers is fully healthy, he could very easily get back to top 5 to 8 status in the league.
Yeah, man. Aaron Rodgers averages 255 passing yards per game over his career. Yeah. He also averages 2.06 touchdowns per game. Can you care to guess the averages of the New York Jets quarterbacks combined last year?
In terms of passing yards per game, given the fact that they only crossed 207 times, I'm going to guess probably in the 175, 180 range average.
171, and their passing touchdowns was 32nd in the NFL at 0.65 passing touchdowns per game. How would anybody produce in that situation? Garrett Wilson has had the worst quarterback play in the NFL the last 2 years, and even an 80% version of previous Aaron Rodgers would be a massive, massive upgrade.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I will give credits. Again, I still have Jefferson at 8, Garrett Wilson at 9. They are very close in my rankings. And I'll just say it right now. Like, you could very well make the case for Garrett Wilson over Jefferson like you have. I don't think you're outlandish for saying that. What I keep defaulting back to, if I'm at the 8th overall pick, can I really stomach passing on potentially the best wide receiver of all time? Again, if you look historically, Justin Jefferson averages 12 receiving yards per game, more than any other wide receiver in NFL history. I don't have the cojones to be able to do it, but I also don't think you're outrageous for saying that.
I do have the cojones to do it. In fact, I did it in our flock league. And if anybody is going to comment down below, of course, the Jets fan is taking Aaron Rodgers and the Garrett Wilson offense. I'm not actually.
You're a Jets fan.
I happen to have a Joe Namath jersey behind me. I'm not actually a Jets fan. Just full disclosure. AJ Brown is the last guy in this tier. He has a really good outlook as well. That Jalen Hurts, the Eagles passing offense looks really solid. Obviously, they expect to be a top 10 scoring unit. AJ Brown's one of the best 5 to 10 receivers in the league. And Kellen Moore coming in could open up some more pass volume for this offense. The only con you have there is that Devontae Smith is also really good, and that's kind of what keeps him down here.
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles offense from a personnel standpoint is loaded, which is why, like, from a pure talent standpoint, I think he's up there with your Tyreek Hill, your CeeDee Lamb, your Justin Jefferson, your Jamarr Chase in terms of wide receiver talent in the league. But like you said, still having to compete for targets with a guy like Devontae Smith. Obviously, Saquon Barkley brought into the backfield this offseason, an immediate upgrade over DeAndre Swift. If you want to rank AJ Brown even upwards of 104, 105, I won't blame you because he is that level of alpha. A guy that last year in the games before the Eagles basically collapsed, the way I kind of outlined that is going into the 49ers game, the Eagles were 10-1. They were viewed as potentially the best team in the NFL. And we definitely saw down the stretch, Brian Johnson offense, everything sort of seemed out of click for them. But before the Eagles offense collapsed, AJ Brown was a near 30% target share player and had 46% of the receiving yards market share of this Eagles passing attack. With Kellen Moore coming in, potentially more passing volume coming in, we could definitely see AJ Brown have his peak NFL season because he's been a 1,400 yard, 10 touchdown receiver. We could very well see him have that CeeDee Lamb level jump to 1,600, 1,700 yards, 12 touchdowns.
Yeah, him having 158 targets in the same offense as Devontae Smith, a 30.1% target share on the season.
Insane talent.
1,456 receiving yards, only 7 touchdowns last year. So there's a very good chance that if Hurts bounces back, they throw the ball a little bit more. There's a good chance that AJ Brown could have another spike in the totem pole here. He could go from 1,450 and 7 to 1,611 touchdowns. And he's going to be a top 5 receiver, no doubt about it if that happens. So let's move into the next tier, guys. Here we got a big cluster of Puka Nacua, Marvin Harrison Jr., probably a mini tier ahead of the rest of these guys: Drake London, Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk, Jalen Waddle, and Deebo Samuel. With a lot of these dudes, there's some clear alphas here. You got Marvin Harrison Jr. going to be a clear alpha, Drake London going to be a clear alpha. And then the rest of these guys, you have Ayuk, Waddle, Nico Collins, and Puka Nacua, who are either the 1A or 1B on their offenses, but all of their offenses are so good. We absolutely love the outlook for the Los Angeles Rams passing attack with Puka Nacua. We love the outlook for the Houston Texans passing attack, for the 49ers passing attack, and for the Miami Dolphins passing attack. So I feel like a lot of people get themselves bogged down on the semantics of, well, Devontae Adams should be ahead of these guys because he's the clear alpha of his team. team. Well, Chris Olave should be ahead of these guys because he's the clear alpha of this team. Historically, when you look back at the wide receivers that are paying off at ADP, it is much more likely that guys who are attached and tethered to great quarterbacks, great offenses, great play callers, especially we got Shanahan and Slowick and Mike McDaniel and Sean McVay here. Like, these are the types of dudes you want to be tethered to. So I get Puka Nakua's got Cooper Kupp there. I get Nico Collins has Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell there. I get Ayuk has Debo there, and Debo has Ayuk there, and Kittle is there, and McCaffrey is there.
Waddle
and
S. Hill.
with Tyreek Hill. But the bottom line is you want pieces of this offense. On Sundays, when you're watching your fantasy team, you are going to be happy that you drafted players from these offenses.
And that's a big thing. Again, we could look at the overall volume of situations, but if you know inherently that an offense will profile as a bottom 5 unit, as we go down to the third round tier, you'll notice the Saints offense with Olave, the Giants offense with Neighbors, the Raiders offense with Devontae Adams. Like, the big difference, again, they are very good target commanding level profiles. But when you're looking at this second round tier, you're getting a lot of targets, but you're also getting the offensive viability. So that is the main difference. Again, the one caveat I will say here is you could make the argument with Puka Nacua. A lot of people would take him in their top 12s. I think him and Marvin Harrison, to me, profile closer to the first round than they do to the rest of this tier. But if you can get them in the second round as your second drafted player, that is even better. If you're at the 12-13 turn and you can get either Puka Nacua or Marvin Harrison Jr. to pair with your Jahmyr Gibbs, that is a foolproof stat. Again, you guys would have saw our picks 9 to 12 strategy, but we do view the top 13 as a first round caliber type of player tier list. Once you get to the 14 to 22 range, once you get to the Drake London, the Nico Collins, the Brandon Ayuk, the Jalen Waddle, the Deebo Samuel, I do think it's a lot more flat. So in terms of the second round tier in particular, I think the clear two standouts are Puka and Marv.
Yeah, I mean, London definitely has the upside to be right
For sure.
with those guys, because if Cousins comes in and he's primo Kirk Cousins like we know and love, he feeds his number one fantasy receiver. Zach Robinson in the Los Angeles Rams scheme coming in probably dictates they're going to throw the ball a lot more than the Atlanta Falcons and Drake London have done, which is their second last in pass rate over expected in the NFL since Drake London has entered the league. So with all of these guys, but London in particular, he has the ability really to achieve a top 5 ceiling. And I drafted him yesterday in my home league draft at the 210, and I felt ecstatic to get him at that area of the board. I think one last thing I want to hammer home on these guys, specifically Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk, and Debo as well, and also Jalen Waddle, is I get that you can look at these guys and be like, okay, well, Nico Collins only had like 108 targets last year, and him and Tank Dell were very similar when they were last on the field together. Brandon Ayuk didn't have that many targets last year. Deebo Samuel didn't have that many targets last year. Jalen Waddle was dealing with a banged up season. Again, look at the history of how we get hits at wide receiver. It is very, very clear as day that you want touchdown upside, you want big play upside, you want extremely talented receivers. All 4 of these guys absolutely are extremely talented receivers, and you want access to offenses,
insulated offenses,
28, 32, 40-point weeks. That is how you win your fantasy league. You do not win your fantasy league by drafting guys like Chris Olave, Devontae Adams, Mike Evans. Again, they have a place on your fantasy team.
Good wide receiver twos.
Exactly. They're great wide receiver twos, good in PPR leagues, but I like to win. I don't know about you guys. I like to win my fantasy leagues. And a guy like Nico Collins, who's 6'4", 215 pounds, plays with one of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL and can be the number one of his team, profiles as a better upside swing.
Yeah, 100%. And the way I would kind of categorize this is if you are picking at the 101, the 102, the 103, your decision for me, whether you want to go McCaffrey or to the 2 wide receivers, if you do go McCaffrey in the top 3, are you going to be locked out of those second round tier receivers? Is the best receiver on the board going to be Chris Olave, Cooper Kupp, Malik Neighbors at that pick? Because if that's the case, I would actually rather start my draft with a wide receiver, knowing that it's much more likely an Achane, a Barkley, a Jonathan Taylor is there for me at the end of the second round. Vice versa. If you're grabbing McCaffrey because you know a Debo, Jalen Waddle, Brandon Ayuk, Nico Collins profile is going to fall to you in the second round, I'm much more willing to start with the running back.
Yeah, and it also kind of is nice getting 2 of these guys, right? Like if you're able to pair at the 2-3 turn after you take Christian McCaffrey in the first, you can grab Nico Collins and Brandon Ayuk, or you can grab Nico Collins and Jalen Waddle, or and Deebo Samuel, or and Drake London, or whatever the case is. Pairing 2 of these guys together feels really good. Like I drafted, or technically drafted, Breece Hall in the first round, and then I was able to pair up Brandon Ayuk and Drake London at the 2-3 turn. So I feel pretty good about having both of those guys as my wide receiver 1 and my wide receiver 2 respectively. And obviously I kept going and I drafted even more wide receivers later on in the draft, and I grabbed Pittman and T. Higgins later. But Let's move into the next tier of guys. I think we covered these other guys pretty well. We have Chris Olave, Cooper Kupp, Malik Neighbors, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Devontae Smith, DJ Moore, and DK Metcalf. The big reason why some of these guys are in here, and we kind of already touched on it, Olave, Neighbors, and Adams specifically, and maybe Evans to some degree as well, is we're a little bit worried about the quarterback play. We're a little bit worried about the offensive insulation. Some of these guys were worried about their age, Evans and Adams specifically, those two guys. With Neighbors and Olave, again, we are specifically worried about Derek Carr and Daniel Jones throwing them the football. But as a good relative heuristic for fantasy football, when a young wide receiver like Chris Olave through his first 2 years has been a consistent wide receiver 2, high target share guy, Derek Carr, if he plays at a capable level, if he plays at a league average level, Chris Olave could crush for a top 10 season. Malik Neighbors has a lot up in the air because he's a rookie, but in spurts, when you've seen him, he looks the real deal. He was a top prospect in ours. He was the second best prospect in the FSC prospect model, comparable to former LSU wide receiver Jamarr Chase, and he can elevate that offense to at least a league average unit, even if Daniel Jones is somewhat of a liability at quarterback.
And that is obviously the risk. Again, if he was in a similar situation to Marvin Harrison Jr., again, we didn't really talk much about Marvin Harrison Jr., but it almost feels like we're hedging it a little bit with the rookie bet because, quite frankly, if this was a second year, third year, fourth year profile with a little bit more production under his belt, Marvin Harrison Jr. would actually be in the mid to late first round tier. With Malik Neighbors, we viewed Malik Neighbors at a similar level that we did Marvin Harrison Jr. The problem, of course, is the history of receivers in bottom 5 offenses. Mason's outlined this a couple times on his channel. Is not great. However, it's kind of a chicken or the egg situation. Is Malik Neighbors going to be affected big time because his offense is so bad? Or is Malik Neighbors just the elite talent that can impact the overall standing of this offense? We tend to believe it's the latter, hence why we believe in Malik Neighbors. If you're comfortable on taking him in the early to mid third round portion of your drafts, his upside is a 150 target Brandon Ayuk efficiency level receiver.
Yeah, and he almost fell back to me at the 410 in my home league draft yesterday. I would have been ecstatic to get him at that point in time because, again, the only thing weighing him down is Daniel Jones in the Giants offense. But what if he is the type of player that can elevate that offense and Jalen Hyatt becomes a good field stretcher and Wan'Dale Robinson's a solid slot receiver and Devin Singletary can carry the work on the ground. Tyrone Tracy mixes in. Daniel Jones plays like 2022 Daniel Jones. I literally almost did it. But at the same time, like, Daniel Jones in 2022 was a playoff quarterback that got him a big extension. Like, that is a league average offense. They were a league average offense with Darius Slayton and Richie James as their top 2 receivers. They did not have a guy like Malik Neighbors. They didn't even have a guy like Jalen Hyatt or Wan'Dale Robinson. Yeah. Wan'Dale was injured that year and Jalen Hyatt hadn't been drafted yet.
And the other thing, too, obviously, we all tend to believe in the fantasy space that Brian Daboll is a good schemer, is a good offensive coach. He just wasn't really working with much last year. Obviously, your starting quarterback tears his ACL. The receiver core, for the most part, very unproven. With Daniel Jones, I almost said it again as well. With Daniel Jones coming back from that knee injury and adding Malik Neighbors to the fold, I trust Brian Daboll to at least provide a steady floor to this offense. Do I think they're going to be a good offense? Hell the fuck no. But do I think they could be a 20 to 25 range rather than a bottom 5 offense because Brian Daboll's calling the shots? Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's precisely. I went back and watched what we said about offenses last year, and we actually said about Devontae Adams that we were worried about the offense not being like 20 to 25 range because the Raiders last year were a top 12 offense in 2022, and then they really took a step back with Jimmy Garoppolo, and then they ended up being kind of big bust. Jacobs and Devontae Adams both ended up disappointing. So we recognize there's an ability here for Malik Neighbors to disappoint, but it's being priced in. You can get him in the 4th round in a lot of people's leagues. We have him ranked in the 3rd round. I was willing to take him, 3-4 turn, and he almost fell back to the 4-5 turn.
And obviously, I had to push him a little bit up the board because in the experts drafts, you can't just let a guy like Malik Neighbors fall to you with your 4th pick. I took him at the 306 in that draft, and I feel very confident. Again, you guys will see the full update on that league, some of the trash talk we were talking in the confessional cams, some of the picks that we were able to make, the teams that we ultimately ended up with. But it was a ton of fun. Again, appreciate Mason, appreciate the whole Flock Fantasy site crew for being able to make that trip really unforgettable.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, with Evans and Adams and Kupp too, we can include them. Are these guys still the same players that they were? Because if Evans is, I think the Bucs are going to be at least a league average offense or better. And you have a chance that he returns yet another monster season when everybody's doubting him, because that's just what Mike Evans does. Devontae Adams, I am legitimately worried that the Raiders might be the worst passing offense in the NFL, despite how good Devontae Adams is. And Devontae Adams himself did fall off a little bit last year. And Cooper Kupp is kind of a similar case where it's like Cooper Kupp was really banged up last year. Is he going to be healthy for a 16-game season or 17-game season, because if Cooper Kupp is healthy, he projects pretty much just as good as his teammate. Like, you can make the argument Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are very similar in terms of target share this year. It's just one guy is a young ascending player, one guy's an older descending player.
Yeah, and I actually took the splits when AOC was starting last year. Now, obviously, context, Gardner Minshew is expected to be the starter, but they could very well go back to Aiden O'Connell week 3, week 4, week 5 in the season. So just looking at the sample size when they did play together in the non-Jimmy Garoppolo started games last year, we did see Devontae Adams be an inefficient receiver. Again, I understand quarterback play was at fault, but do we really expect Gardner Minshew to be a big improvement for this offense? Or as we saw with Aiden O'Connell last year, Devontae Adams was producing less than 7 yards per target in that stretch, despite a 33% target share, and was averaging less than 2 yards per route run and had a 36.18% receiving yards market share. Again, we know Devontae Adams, he was separating, he was mailboxing down the field, and his quarterbacks were missing him. But do we really expect that to change going into 2024?
Yeah, not to mention, what if Bowers and Myers eat into his target share a little bit?
Sure.
Adams another year older. What if he takes a little bit of a step back in terms of an ability standpoint? I'm almost willing to go out on a limb and say he's going to be a New York Jet by the trade deadline, because I think it's going to be such a train wreck in Las Vegas that he needs to get the hell out of there. And I really do think that's possible. With the other guys in this tier, I mean, you have Devontae Smith, DJ Moore, DK Metcalf. I think Smith and Moore specifically, you're kind of worried about target competition. You're worried about Odunze. You're worried about Keenan Allen, and you're worried about AJ Brown, respectively there. With Metcalf, I do think he might have the highest ceiling of any guy in this area, because although he has Lockett and JSN, Lockett is on the decline, JSN is unproven. It is very possible that DK Metcalf is the clear alpha of this offense, an offense that wants to stretch the field more, an offense that wants to throw the ball downfield, use DK Metcalf in the red zone. Geno Smith with Ryan Grubb could end up being the thing that unlocks DK Metcalf. We haven't seen him finish as a top 12 guy since his second season. It's very possible he gets back there.
You're being able to take a free lottery shot in the sense that he's kind of being drafted where he's finished in the last few years. But with Ryan Grubb coming in, I do think this is the best the offense looks in terms of on paper going into the season. Fun fact actually provided by Hayden Winks over on Underdog. But basically with the Ryan Grubb Washington Husky offense, with Michael Penix, with those 3 wide receivers last year, top 10 in the country in deep pass rate, top 10 in the country in pass rate over expectation. Again, we expect, Kenneth Walker to be a solid running back, but we do think the offensive focus for the Seattle Seahawks will revolve around that passing game. Again, you guys know our thoughts. We think JSN is going to be a big time breakout this year. We've talked about the opportunity for Noah Fant. Obviously, Tyler Lockett dealing with hamstring issues right now, but should still work into the mix. But DK Metcalf, to me, in terms of the valuable targets down the field, that's 6'4", 235-pound frame with Geno Smith fully healthy. I can see Geno Smith getting back to 2022 level.
Yeah, a lot of these guys project as wide receiver 2s, some of them with wide receiver 1 upside. I would say the guys that have wide receiver 1 upside in here are probably Kupp, Olave, Neighbors, Evans, maybe Devontae Smith, but probably unlikely if AJ Brown is still on the field. And I think Moore and Metcalf could do it. It's just a little bit more challenging because of the target competition that they currently have. But regardless, all of these guys are the types of players that we are taking over dead zone running backs. You heard us talk about Mixon and Walker and Kamara and all those guys in the running back video. The reason we're not really drafting a lot of those guys is because this territory sometimes slips into the 4th round, even potentially into the 5th round with guys like Smith, with guys like Moore, with guys like Metcalf. People have these certain narratives built up around them. So let's get into the final tier of our wide receiver rankings here. We're going through our top 30 wide receivers. So our final tier here is Rashee Rice, Michael Pittman, who I drafted last night, T. Higgins, who I drafted last night, George Pickens, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, and Amari Cooper. So a lot to unpack with this last year. You have a lot of young players like Rice, like Pickens, like Flowers, like Dell, who were looking for a step forward. Obviously, they're not any higher than this because there's target competition, there's low volume in some of these cases. And then you also have the proven,
the steady
guys who are in their prime, like Pittman and Higgins specifically, are proven guys who are in their prime. And then you have the elder statesman with Stephon Diggs and with Amari Cooper, where we're kind of wondering, do they still have it? Are they still the clear alpha here? Diggs, obviously a lot of target competition. Amari Cooper, a little bit of a quarterback question mark, and a little bit more target competition with Jerry Jeudy being brought in there. So there's a lot of question marks. So I'll let you go in any direction you want to go in here. Like, my personal favorite guys here are the wide receivers who are in their prime, who have been consistent producers already, and that is Pittman and Higgins.
For me, my favorite, actually, one of the bigger differences in this area, you have him at 45 overall. I actually have him at 33 overall. So for me personally, I actually view Rashid Rice being closer to the third round area than this area. Now, I understand on surface level, they added two, field stretching wide receivers with Xavier Worthy and Marquise Brown. People will argue the target competition. I think personally, stylistically, Rashid Rice's role is much more specialized compared to those two wide receivers. We expect Worthy and Brown to be able to affect that third level of the defense. Rashid Rice kind of playing that slot role, yards after catch role in that intermediate portion of the field. With Rashid Rice down the stretch last year, weeks 11 to 17, legitimate wide receiver one in fantasy. I understand earlier in the offseason, people were worried, is he going to face a suspension? Is he going to miss any time? Is he just flat out a knucklehead that I can't trust? I mean, we talked about that a couple times early in the offseason, but by all accounts, I mean, Drew Davenport, actually, you've mentioned a couple times on the channel, he believes that the Rashid Rice suspension is not coming in 2024. And if it does come, it will actually happen in 2025. Again, a proven lawyer. If you guys haven't actually already followed him on Twitter, make sure you do so. Drew Davenport FF on Twitter. But he actually studies law. He looked into the situation and he basically said Rashid Rice is much less likely to get suspended. And with Rashid Rice, I mean, if we're talking about the offensive situation, arguably the best offense in the league, the best overall quarterback in the league, a quarterback that last year probably hit his floor in terms of what we could expect from a passing touchdown standpoint. 27 passing touchdowns from Patrick Mahomes, a guy that with these wide receivers added specifically around Rashid Rice can flirt with the 35, 40, 45 passing touchdown range. So to me, I'm potentially getting the number one receiving weapon on an offense I believe so heavily in with a quarterback I believe so heavily in. So I'm willing to take the Rashid Rice bet. Again, I currently have him ranked as a top 24 option, and even that kind of seems baking in the risk.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm at 25, but I still really do like Rashid Rice. And in home league ADP right now, like you're getting him in the 5th, 6th round. Like you do not have to take him as high as we have him ranked right now. Like I said, the guys that I feel the most confident in are Pittman because he's a clear alpha of his team. I think that Shane Steichen's a really good coach. I mean, they almost made the playoffs last year with Gardner Minshew, and you just heard us trash Gardner Minshew in terms of what he could do for the Las Vegas Raiders. T. Higgins, I've talked about on numerous occasions. People undervalue him just because he suffers hamstring and shoulder injuries all the time. But again, all that stuff is not predictive. It's not like he is very likely to suffer that stuff going forward. It's not chronic. It's something that he just keeps, unfortunately, getting unlucky with. So T. Higgins is a guy that I feel really comfortable with because I can bank on the fact that he's the number 2 receiver in one of the best passing offenses in the league. Pickens and Flowers are really interesting case studies because both guys are projected to be clear alpha number 1 wide receivers of their team. Of course, with Flowers, you got Mark Andrews there, but with Pickens, you're worried about the pass volume of the offense. You're worried. I mean, I don't think that Ayuk is going to get traded there at this point, but even if Ayuk is not there, let's just pretend he stays in San Francisco for a second. George Pickens is still going to potentially suffer. Like, think if you wanted Drake London last year, Arthur Smith is the offensive coordinator of this team. And his number 1 receiver last year, Drake London, did not have the production that we all know Drake London was capable of. So does George Pickens get held back by the pass volume, by the offense? Again, there is no Desmond Ridder, which is what I'm sure you're going to point to. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, better quarterbacks than what they've had in Atlanta.
George Pickens is a guy I've really struggled with because, yes, I understand the offensive situation really looks bleak, but you mentioned Desmond Ridder. Kenny Pickett was objectively even worse. 13 passing touchdowns on 713 passing attempts as a Pittsburgh Steeler. Like, I get Russell Wilson is not the greatest quarterback in the league or very far from it, but with George Pickens, we actually saw last year, again, very small sample, take it with a grain of salt, but it just kind of provides context to what he can do when he is the full number 1 alpha, full number 1 focus of the offense. But in the 4 games that Deontay Johnson was inactive last season, we saw George Pickens 16.6 PPR points per game, which would have ranked as a wide receiver 11, 27.75% target share. And in terms of his efficiency metrics, 2.79 yards per route run, a 48.17 receiving yards market share. So if he really takes that next step, develops into a better pure separator on all 3 levels of the field, the talent is clearly there. And another fun fact is we talk about all the talented wide receivers from that 2022 class. Obviously, Drake London, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, George Pickens working into that group. If you look at their historical yards per route run, George Pickens is actually top of the group.
Yeah, he's been really good considering the circumstances, playing with Deontay Johnson, playing with bad quarterback play. So he's a hard pass. Like, I mean, he's a hard guy to pass on. Sorry. Like, I passed on him for Tank Dell in our flock league when I drafted it. The reason I did that is because I feel pretty safe about the Houston Texans offensive projection. Yes. And I do feel a little bit pessimistic on Stephon Diggs, obviously, to the point that I think Tank Dell could be the number 2 receiver there behind Nico Collins. But it is, you could look back on that decision and me passing on a number 1 wide receiver for potentially a number 3 wide receiver as a really stupid move in hindsight.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's going to have their pros and cons. Again, you guys are going to have receivers in this range that you absolutely love. You guys are going to have receivers in this range you absolutely hate. Again, that's the beauty of the mid rounds of wide receiver in the sense that you can make upside and downside cases for all of these. Like, I think George Pickens is a very good player, but if the Steelers offense, again, we talked about the history of bottom 5 offenses in fantasy football. Typically speaking, if your offense ranks in the bottom 5, top 12 upside is very hard to attain.
Yeah, absolutely. Your hope is that Arthur Smith can do what he did in Tennessee with AJ Brown and Derrick Henry and all those type of guys. And Zay Flowers is a similar case just because the pass volume is really low, but at least the Ravens offense should be good. And at least Lamar Jackson obviously won the MVP last year. So Zay Flowers is also the type of guy that I'm okay taking in this area because I have offensive pass production question marks and the fact that he might be the number 2 overall target there with Mark Andrews. But Mark Andrews has also not been really able to stay healthy the last couple of years. It's possible that Zay Flowers is the clear alpha of this offense and has a breakout 140 target. I think the career trajectory you're looking at with Zay Flowers is if he hits this year, he looks kind of like he had kind of like a Jalen Waddle-like rookie season. If he had a Jalen Waddle-like second season, you're talking about a top 12 guy.
For sure. And I mean, the final guy in that tier, obviously, with Amari Cooper. Again, a riskier proposition. He always seems to be dealing with lower body injuries. Obviously, the concern of the quarterback play if Deshaun Watson doesn't get back to top level. But even in the games we saw last year with Deshaun Watson, 5 games they played together, 23.15% target share in that stretch, 17.6 PPR points per game. And we also saw the efficiency metrics, 2.71 yards per route run, and a 46.83% receiving yards market share. Again, there are some more downsides going into this year, though. Jerry Jeudy obviously traded for this offseason. Maybe Elijah Moore takes a little bit of a step up. We saw David Njoku in the second half of the season really explode. Again, I think this is an offense that will be much more pass-centric than we have historically seen from the Cleveland Browns, but that really all hinges on just what's going on with Deshaun Watson. I mean, it's reported every 2 weeks that this guy's dealing with arm soreness.
Yeah, literally came out 2 minutes ago that he's not playing in the final preseason game because his arm is still sore. So, I mean, on top of all that too, like Amari Cooper is in year 10 of his career. It's possible that he takes his downtick in terms of like wide receiver age cliffs and things of that nature. He's also the type of guy that when he deals with an injury, he plays through it and he plays, poorly. And that's usually what ends up happening. He's not the type of guy that misses like 12 games with an injury, but he does tend to play through injuries, and it could really affect his overall bottom line. As an older receiver, you're more likely and more prone to suffer injuries like that, and it's more likely to affect you because you're older. You don't recover as faster as when you were younger. So Amari Cooper's a guy that I struggle with a little bit. He's not the type of guy that I typically draft because I'm worried about the risk profile. I would rather draft a younger receiver like T. Higgins, like Michael Pittman Jr., who kind of go in the similar range of the draft here. And then Stephon Diggs, the last guy we can just touch on here. He kind of tapered off his production down the stretch last year. With Stephon Diggs, you were on the Buffalo Bills offense, and the Bills were throwing a fair amount. Obviously, at the end of the season, they started to run the ball a little bit more, but Diggs was really bad. Like, he was like barely a top 35, top 40 receiver in fantasy down the stretch of the season last year, barely cracking 10, 11 PPR points per game.
Yeah, so he was in that stretch, 10.93 PPR points per game. So for reference, the split that I took is the second half of the season in games he played over 60+% of the snaps. So weeks 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 16, and 17 was the sample size. Basically the entirety of the second half of the season, albeit for week 15. And with Stephon Diggs in that time frame, despite a 24.55% target share from freaking Josh Allen, 10.93 PPR points per game, which was the wide receiver 45 across a full season, a 1.27 yards per route run rate, completely terrible. Like, we're looking at even worse than what Brandon Cooks was at last year, an 18.59% receiving yards market share. Again, a guy that was getting 8.1 targets per game, producing less than 20% of their receiving yards down the stretch. It was a decline flat out, and reception perception would point to that as well. In the 70th and 60th percentiles in terms of separation against man, zone, and press coverage compared to a guy that was 90s across the board 2 years ago. I understand the offensive insulation of the Houston Texans situation, but I think it's much more likely he is the wide receiver 3 in this offense versus I've seen people out there that think he could very well be the wide receiver 1. And we're on the same page. It is Nico Collins, and then Tank Dell or Stephon Diggs are fighting for that 2 spot.
Yeah, and I'm putting my chips into the Tank Dell bucket of that because him and CJ Stroud obviously have very good chemistry. You also have to think, too, that Diggs is the newcomer to this offense. He's the elder statesman. He's the older guy that we've seen the decline from. Nico Collins and Tank Dell are the guys that have chemistry with the current quarterback because they played with him last year. So that's kind of where we're at with the Tank Dell Diggs situation. Diggs, like you said, obviously wants a very, very good 90th percentile
Elite.
separator. That was not the case last year. And was that just injury? Was that just happenstance? Maybe you can get back to that. When you typically see your old wide receivers who were previously elite start to taper off in their 30s, like we've seen from Diggs, it's usually a sign of things to come, not necessarily the type of bounce back candidate you want to be betting on.
Yeah, instead just simply take a younger appreciating option. Like, I mean, just in the same offense we mentioned Tank Dell. Tank Dell was very good on a per target basis, on a per route basis last year when he was healthy. At this point in his career, I would make the case that a healthy Tank Dell is a better wide receiver than Stephon Diggs. Now, obviously, again, Stephon Diggs will still have a role in this offense, probably dominating a lot of those slot targets, the underneath targets. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, more downfield type of wide receivers. Stephon Diggs providing, that security for CJ Stroud in this offense. But point blank, I just don't want to be swinging for a single or a double with my pick if I'm taking a wide receiver. And I think Stephon Diggs can very well play off at that rate, but I want a guy that can legitimately be a home run. If Tank Dell looks anything like he did last year, has home run upside, and of course, in that same offense, you guys know our thoughts. We think Nico Collins will be a home run.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more a pro Collins take really than an anti Diggs take, but we don't also really love Diggs' price tag, especially in home leagues. He does typically, like in my home league, he went at like the 302 or something like that. Like he went really, really high because a lot of people still see the name Stephon Diggs. You've never been able to get this guy at this level of a discount.
He's a mid-first last year.
Last couple of years.
He went in the mid-first round last year. He was a top 5, top 6, top 7 overall pick.
And he was actually really good for the start of the season. And I actually sold him high at like week 8 or whatever. And he was like a top 5 receiver at the time. But obviously, like we said, really tapered off down the stretch. So those were our top 30 wide receiver rankings. We went through bull cases, bear cases, why we're in on them, why we're out on them. And of course, you're going to want all of our rankings. If you guys have a fantasy draft tonight, tomorrow, next weekend, whatever the case is, our draft guide is available down below in the link in the description. You can sign up on underdogfantasy.com. Use the promo code FSE when you sign up and deposit $10 or more. You're going to get a special pick 'em. You're going to a 50% deposit match back up to $1,000 for using our promo code. And also you'll get our draft guide emailed to you within 24 hours. So hopefully when you sign up, you'll have time to get the draft guide before the draft that you guys have coming up is live, but it should come to you right away. And if not, it'll be within 24 hours. Definitely check out all that stuff. We have all of our rankings, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight end, how these guys finished last year in fantasy point production. You made reference to the Truth Series, which is something you break down, contextualize game logs of when this player who was injured for a couple of games was actually on the field. How good was he last year? I break down risk ratings, talking about offensive insulation, talking about how good their talent is, how good is their situation, how much pass volume do they have. All that stuff goes into the risk ratings, and I'll be doing a video on that tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. All that stuff and more is in our draft guide, including fantasy news of the day clips and all that kind of stuff. So if you want our draft guide, link down below in the description, link down below in the pinned comment. If you can't play Underdog where you live or you already have an account, you can also get access to it on flockfantasy.com. Use the promo code FSE over there for 7 days for free, 30% off all of the packages, 6 months for free when you sign up annually. You'll get our draft guide. You get all the draft guides of the other creators, and stay tuned for next week. We are going to be dropping all of the videos that we recorded while we were in Texas with the other creators. Those were a ton of fun. So stay tuned for that. But with that being said, leave a like, subscribe, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.